Welcome, everybody. Welcome, friends. And it's great to be together with you tonight. Betty invited me to speak about our patron, St. Junipero Serra, in light of the many issues that have arisen over these past 5 or 6 years since his canonization relative to the defense of him. But also, I think, as a little background about why Serra is really be my purpose here for this call. So having an opportunity to speak a little bit about him in the past, off and on, and to be, say, a student of history, my intention here today is to talk a little bit about him, talk about the most recent presentation which was given by Archbishop Cordileone to Serra Meets just a couple of months ago, and talk about his defense, and then just talk about what moving forward as programs, how we could possibly integrate some of these ideas or some ideas into the club at the club level, as far as dealing with just his history and what we can learn from that, and so what we can learn from him. So first of all, historically, we know from the historical records of our organization, when the Serra organization, when Serra was founded in Seattle, for the first number of months, they didn't have a name for themselves, and so it was later, about some less than a year, but maybe 3 or 4 or 5 months or so after they had been meeting for weekly, that it was introduced to them from an invitee, a new member who was originally from California, and knew the story about Father Serra. And Father Serra in California, and this is in the mid 30s, was gaining some prominence within California. And it was right about that time too that they promoted his and understood his importance to the founding of California, original founding, and that they positioned that statue in Statuary Hall, was around, just right around that same period of time. So it was Padre Serra. And so that name was given to, it was given to our organization, but you got to think that what was appealing to them was just his missionary zeal. And I think that our original founders of our organization really identified with and wanted to emulate that zeal that Padre Serra exhibited and was known for in the writings, through the historical writings and the like that were available and prominent at that time. So we rode along with that for many, many years. And of course, when he became beatified in 1988, and then subsequently after that in 2016, I think it was, 2015, when he was canonized, these were great moments for us to see that our patron, had been elevated in the eyes of the church and recognized for his saintly work and his efforts as a missionary in California during that early period and during its founding, and how critical he was, and the Franciscans that accompanied him to found and to really establish that not only the church, but to establish a civilization, culture that would meet the needs of the future for the Native Americans that they found there. And that certainly their interest too, of course, was in the proclamation of the gospel to them, and an invitation to those who were of like mind or became of like mind, to join the Catholic Church. And so subsequently to that, we have many, many Catholic families, or Catholic Native American families, that have had generations and generations and generations of being Catholic and identifying with their Catholic faith as that. We look at Saint Serra, and he had, and we emulate him and also respect him. We learn from from the books that are available to many people. And so going back, a recent book that came out, it's under Clooney Media, is here, Junipero Serra, Pioneer, Missionary, and Saint. It was written in 1933 by Agnes Repplier, and it was and has been recently reissued edited by Jeremy Bear, who is the principal partner of this American philanthropic and author of many books. And so it's updated by him, but it's an amazing story about both the God's work in working through Junipero Serra and what the great things that happened through him and through the Franciscans that accompanied him. So I find that some of these books are just amazingly inspirational, of course. You know, the book that is probably the most recent and the most, well, I'll call it the most authoritative right now, is this most recent book written by Rosemarie Beebe and Robert Senkowitz. This married couple wrote the book entitled Junipero Serra, California, Indians and the Transformation of a Missionary. This couple also made a presentation of Serra's life up at our Serra International Convention that was held in Anchorage, Alaska in 2010. And so it was just a tremendous, probably the most definitive and most authoritative depiction of both Junipero Serra's in his life, as well as his effect on the California missions and just the work that he did. So these two books are very, very well done. In my history, there's a number of books. In particular, we have Monsignor Weber, and so he is located up at the mission at San Fernando in California. And when we did our Serra mission trip a couple years ago, when we left out of Ventura, we went and visited with Monsignor Weber. And so he wrote this particular book, The Life and Times of St. Junipero Serra, in 1988, and in subsequent updates. You know, after that, he wrote another book entitled Blessed Fray Junipero Serra. So after he became beatified, and this particular book, I think, was written in 2007, and which is lots of great pictures and understandings of the culture that Junipero Serra helped bring to the Indians, the Native Americans here in California. So subsequent to that, you know, we know that his efforts, and I think we're so inspired by just his spirituality, his way of dealing with the American Indians, his defense of them being most notable as far as his being writing essentially the first Bill of Rights for the Native Americans, in his own defense of the Native Americans and the local communities against the problems that they run into from the secular side of the Spanish conquest, I guess, we might call it, or as they claim that territory to the crown, to the Spanish crown. So Junipero Serra was a man that represents a real transformation of a society. And so the introduction of a European Catholic Christendom society into a very primitive Native American communities along the Alta California coast, with the missions being established pretty much within a 50-mile distance from the coast, going up until San Francisco. So that's particularly important. As we look at St. Junipero Serra's life, we see that it's in sections, essentially sections. And the first section would be his early life, as it is in Spain, in Palma, when he joined the Franciscans as a young man, and then subsequently was able to really excel in studies and to become a doctor and to become a professor. This out of an immigrant, or rather a farming community, and his parents were illiterate. So really a dramatic change in just what his lifestyle was. And then in 1749, answering a call to leave all that, let's call it a cushy job or a nice job that he had, that he could have had for the rest of his life, possibly being a professor, a teacher there at the Llewellyn University. But then he came to the New World because he felt a desire, a calling in his heart to really to proclaim the gospel and to proclaim it to people that hadn't heard it yet. And so when he landed in Mexico, and the famous walk from Veracruz up to the hill of Our Lady of Guadalupe to proclaim and to dedicate his work to our Blessed Mother from that day forward, and then having that encounter, if you will, with the insect that caused that bite, which would be infected his leg, which affected him, for the rest of his life. He then became enculturated into the Franciscan community there in Mexico City, and he was being trained to become a missionary. And within a year or so, he was assigned to the Palma Indians community, which was a section in what they call Japan, which is a couple hundred miles north of Mexico City, in an area that had been Christianized, but was so difficult to reach that they rarely saw a religious person or a priest or any of that nature. And so it was, in a sense, kind of starting over from scratch, and he had to learn their language. He helped to develop a written expression of their language that had never been done before, and all in part of the teaching and the catechesis of that Indian community. He also started building churches up there. So there was 5 missions that they eventually started, with all beautiful stone carved mission churches that really replaced very rundown and very humble gathering areas before. So he had in those 5 areas and those 5 missions some remarkable stone crafting skills. Again, in a sense, I look at it as he was kind of training, in a sense, for his ultimate trip, which would have been to Alta California. So in that respect, he was really learning a lot of his techniques. Also, I want to emphasize that the austerity of the Franciscan life at that particular time, and the trainings of these missionaries they were really a great demand on their physical prowess and their ability to endure many difficult times and very difficult conditions. So these were very strong and dedicated men that went out as Franciscan missionaries. After 8 years and quite an experience up there in the Sierra Gorda Mountains, he came back to Mexico City and then was going to be assigned to San Saba, up by just north of San Antonio, Texas, and was going to go there next. But that mission was overrun right prior to him leaving by the Comanches, and they killed all the Franciscans and all the people that were in that particular mission. So they essentially wiped it out. And so we changed their direction. They assigned him for the next, I think, up to 10 years that he became kind of a roving, not roving so much, but someone that would go out and make mission trips around within the central Mexico area. And so that was his task, was that next time was to basically be an evangelizer within the communities. It's interesting to reflect that when Saint Serra came into to Mexico, that Our Lady of Guadalupe had already appeared and was over 200 years prior to his arrival. And so her presence was very well known, and the devotion to her was very established, very much established. And so this was part of that community and part of that culture that he lived within. And we see evidence of that as he builds these churches in the dedication to Our Lady of Guadalupe, very strong emphasis of that particular dedication and devotion. So then we see that he's been is assigned because to Baja California, the missions that were there in the lower area that were founded by the Jesuits, about 15 or 20, I forget, some number like that, and the mother house of those missions was in Loreto in the Baja area. So the Jesuits had been removed from all the Spanish kingdom because of by a decree of the king, and so the Franciscans were to take that over those immediately, and they did. But it wasn't more than a year or so that Spain realized that had heard and was fearful that Russia was going to begin to claim some of that northern area that they thought they had been, not thought, but that they had claimed earlier. There were earlier missionaries that went into those sections of Alta California, but they were just there to discover, and then they left. And so there was a mass that was said in the Monterey area back in the 1600s, so over 150 years prior to that, by Father Luis Ascension. Had the first mass in Monterey area, and so it was there that they were looking at to try to accomplish and to get to in a very difficult effort to move into that Alta California and to claim it for Spain in a more practical way and a more physical way. And they would do that by establishing missions and presidios. And so those two would go together in many places. The presidio would have been the military compound where the soldiers would gather, and that would be the protection that they would need. And they established a presidio they established them in San Diego, in Santa Barbara, in Monterey, and San Francisco. And so those were the 4 presidios. And then they had missions next to them or close to them that would go along. And so as Serra went along, he was part of a military expedition, as well as let's call it a evangelizing expedition. And so typically they would travel together. But it was in Serra's understanding and realization that the soldier population did not mix well with the Native American population. And so early on, and it's established, this has happened up in Carmel, is that he decided that it would be much better to have these 2 areas physically distance from each other, meaning the mission some miles away from the presidios, because it was difficult to prevent the soldiers from harassing the women, Native Americans and Indians, and there was just difficult combinations there. So really the Franciscans were really an important element to protect the Indians as well as to develop them. When you go through the missions, you see a tremendous amount of, in particular, I'm thinking of San Juan Capistrano, I'm thinking of Santa Barbara, I'm thinking about the mission down in St. Louis Rey, down just north of San Diego. And you see how the introduction of cultivation of crops, of animal husbandry, of crafts and skills such as leatherworking, pottery, things of that nature became part of the product, if you will, or part of the action of the missions. The missions were developed really for the spiritual benefit and the temporal benefit of the Indians in the area. And so they were established there. They were established in areas where they could find the local communities, which were the tribes that were largely nomadic, and they lived, pretty much off the land, and moved around a bit. So also there was a lot of various tribes, local tribes, because there might have been 50 or more individual tribes with their own languages, with their own ways of communication. Most of them, and all of them, probably none of them had a written language. And so all part of this effort to gather the Indians together to improve their life, to introduce them and invite them into the Christian life and the like. And that was really largely the most important thing for Junipero Serra. In 2016, at the Serra rally that was in Phoenix, we had Father Joe Kenichi, the Franciscan historian, speak of the spirituality of St. Junipero Serra and of the importance of his heart and growing up or rather developing as a Franciscan all the years that he was available. So I would say it was, over 60 years of Franciscan. And so it was a great presentation. It's online, it's available to review. And when you look at that and how his tremendous love for the Native American populations really comes forth in his writings and his the way he expresses himself, and coming from his own Franciscan roots, is just an important element of this, of his life. So not only is he physically able to meet demanding chores of creating these compound or this mission components out of nothing, and finding them and determining them and introducing these concepts of agriculture and to improve the lot, if you will, of all the Native Americans, to create these edifices, these mission compounds, of which all of them look different. They're all different, unique. The architecture becomes an important part of the landscape of California, so much so that even now, as Archbishop Cordileone talks about mission architecture as being one of the gifts that the Franciscans provided to the communities and to California itself, that continues on. So as we go through his life, and of course, we realize that nothing was easy for anybody. Then eventually, we know that he had his issues with the governors, the viceroys, the various governing components within Mexico, whom California was under the rule of, so to speak. And then, so we know that he stood up for him. We know that he did a lot of great things for this. And so subsequent to that, he was able to found 9 missions during his life, significant ones, significant start to what ultimately, as everybody knows, 21 missions that were ultimately founded over the next 20, 30 years. To complete the mission system, until finally Mexico gained its independence from Spain, and then the missions became largely secularized, or in other words, they were under the local diocesan, local diocese, as opposed to the mission or the Franciscans. And so this happened many years after St. Junipero Serra passed away, and he died in 1781. And so it was after that, much after that, that they into what they call the Mexican period, which is about 20 years or so. That period existed from about 1920 or 1828 to 1848. Was what they call the Mexican era. And then at that time in 1848, the gold rush happened right after that. And so that becomes what they call the American era. And that's when things got rough for the Indian, because by that time, most of the missions had been, if you will, abandoned and secularized, and really just a small cadre were left open. And then the Indians became, if you will, I mean, the Americans, as the settlers and the like moved into the area, those who didn't make it rich in the gold fields were looking for land, typically, because they would have come with probably their skills would have been farming, but they needed the land, and so they would procure it one way or the other, and usually that wasn't good for the local communities. And so so that really became kind of the dark era, so to speak, of California. It was right around the gold rush, and after that, for the next 30, 40, 50 years, is when things got very difficult as far as that the American Indian community. So as we finish up this last thing, I want to talk to you a little bit about the defense of St. Junipero Serra. So right now, we've had a number of speakers talk about this. In a couple years ago, the year after, I think, no, it was the first year in Ventura Rally, we had Christian Clifford speak to us about the issues that relate to how currently the history seems to be revealing, or not, it's being presented as a revelation, that things weren't so good when the Franciscans had it, and they got this problem and that problem, they did this and they did that, and they have terrible accusations of genocide and just terrible accusations against St. Junipero Serra and the Franciscans. But they use St. Serra as kind of like the bellwether and the kind of the post that they want to beat the most. And so we know too that over these last few years, the desecrations of the statues, both in public areas as well as on the actual physical locations of some of the missions, are largely, evidence that there's just change in the air. And some of this is just unfortunate, and some of it is just, I think, a real, if you will, kind of an assault on our own Catholic heritage. And so I think St. Junipero Serra takes the brunt of that. And there's maybe not a good understanding of who St. Junipero Serra is, or who he was, rather. So to echo Archbishop Corleone's presentation, we need to know our history if we want to defend our patron. And so we need to know our history. We need to be aware of both the good and the bad. It's the light and dark. I mean, nothing's perfect. Nobody is perfect. But, but when we think about just in the case of the canonization of St. Junipero Serra, many things came up because St. Serra was being promoted, to canonization. But, in that, when you look at the effort that they went through to prepare the paperwork and the argument for his canonization, there was over 2,400 documents of 7,500 pages. 5,000 of those pages were written by people that personally knew St. Junipero Serra, of the documents that they looked at and the like. And so there is the tremendous amount of research, et cetera, that's been put into the evaluation of St. Junipero Serra as a saint, okay? Not as a perfect man, but as a saint. And so that's important to understand that process. The accusations that the Indians, for some reason or somehow, were living in the Garden of Eden before the Spanish showed up on the scene, can be pretty much understood in a better sense through study and the like. And so there was clearly a confrontation, if you will, of cultures, a European culture and the Native American or it's just the Indian cultures. But the section that when you review how things happen over a period of time, and then you use the glasses, the blinders, so to speak, of your own understanding of life and the like. They call that presentism, meaning that we kind of view the world through the lens of today. And so you have to kind of understand what is going on during, the times that St. Serra was on this earth. What was the culture like? What was the common things that people would expect? And another thing is that people, I think, in these days and age, are blinded by victimhood, and so there seems to be a great promotion of that. Everybody's selling victimhood, and a lot of people are buying it. And so I think part of it is we need to understand why we do what we do, or rather why he did it, and that we, as a lucky organization to adopt his name to call ourselves Serrans, need to be aware of the importance of his effect on those people in California, his effect on the whole West Coast. We could identify him as a founding father of the United States. As in 1776, it's important to know, and you do know, I'm sure you already know, that he founded two missions in 1776, San Juan Capistrano and San Francisco, while in the East Coast we're having the Declaration of Independence signed. And so you can see the development that's happening. The first religious services that were ever held on this continent were Catholic masses. And so the importance of our Catholic faith towards the development of culture and the improvement of people's lives here on this earth, the temporal needs of individuals are being well addressed, and be confidently known that we've got a great patron. We need to know more about how to defend his legacy, and because if we don't, others will redefine him and paint him in a corner that he never was supposed to be in. So I'm really grateful that Archbishop Cordileone gave the Serra Meets. It's recorded. It is hard to find right now, but you can find it on the Serra YouTube channel. So that's youtube.com, and it's Serra space international, and you'll find Archbishop Cordileone's talk. We also have Christian Clifford's presentation at the Ventura Serra Rally, a great presentation about the defense of St. Junipero Serra, done by him as well. And then the many books that I mentioned, of which, Betty, I will supply to you and to a bibliography of the ones that I presented earlier on in this presentation, as well as links to those individual video presentations. And then I want to recommend that the clubs do something to learn about St. Junipero Serra during this coming year. And one of the easiest and one of the first things that I've noticed that some clubs do is that even in that Serra novena, there's a great presentation, a short biography in that 9-day novena where it talks about Saint Serra and his efforts. And so that Serra novena would also be a good way to introduce Saint Serra to the club, new members, and the ones that have been here for some time.